So today what I want to talk about is how to use Label Studio to label images, specifically label with polygon segmentations, and also, most importantly, how we can use the outputs of Label Studio to share labeling projects across multiple users. So if you have multiple people working on the same labeling project, how can you compare labels back and forth in an efficient way? And Label Studio makes this a really easy and relatively straightforward to do that. So I'm going to be using a Linux box today, and the main difference between different platforms, if you use Linux, Windows, or Mac, is basically going to be in the installation process of Label Studio. And there, within that realm, if the main difference is going to be whether you use a terminal or whether you use a command prompt on Windows. So, and before I get going with this tutorial, I want to point out that Label Studio has a great set of tutorials available, which I will link in the description, that I highly suggest you browse if you have any trouble. I know they helped me when I had very general questions. And I'd also like to point out that the Label Studio team maintains a Slack channel, and they are very responsive. So if you have very specific questions and you can't find the answer online on Stack Overflow or something, you can go over to their Slack channel and they can help you address your questions directly. So to get started, if you don't have Label Studio installed on your computer yet, we can simply use pip to install Label Studio. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a pip install Label Studio. I've already installed it on my computer, so it's very fast, but even if you don't have it installed, the installation is a quick process. We can check the installation by saying which Label Studio, and we see that it's there, right there in my bin, so that's all well and good. And now let's go ahead and think about how we want to set up our directories to hold a certain labeling project. So I went ahead on my desktop and created this directory called test label project. And if we navigate to that directory, we see we have two subdirectories. One is foo labels and the other is bar labels. And these two directories correspond as an example of two different users, or different people who are going to be working on this labeling project together. And we'll talk more about that later on in the tutorial. For now, let's just focus on the user foo. And if we double click on that directory, we see the only thing in this directory right now is a data directory. If we double click on that, we'll see we have some simple JPEG images. We can look at one. These data actually come from drone imagery of the Galapagos, and this project is going to focus on labeling different types of lava that we observe in these drone photographs. So now let's go ahead and navigate back to our terminal, and let's start Label Studio, but we're going to first need to point ourselves into that directory. So we're going to cd to our desktop, and we're going to go to our test label project. Remember, we want to be in the directory foo labels, because that's the user that we're going to be emulating here. And again, the only thing in this directory is our data. So now let's start Label Studio. We're going to say Label Studio start, and we need to start a labeling project. And for simplicity, I'm just going to call this project labeling, but you can call it whatever you want. And because we haven't started this project yet, we need to initialize it with an init flag like this. We can go ahead and hit enter, and we'll see we'll have some prompts on our terminal, and then we'll have our default web browser open up. And this is the first example of how intuitive and powerful Label Studio is. All of our labeling is going to be done on this web page that is hosted locally on our 8080 port. So this is going to make all of our work in labeling data very intuitive and very easy. The first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and set up our environment, our configuration file. And Label Studio is a general tool. You can use it to classify multiple types of data, so acoustic data, We are going to use it to classify image data. Specifically, in this tutorial, we're going to talk about polygon segmentation. So let's go ahead and click polygon segmentation and click proceed. And what that's going to do is generate a bit of code here that we can directly edit. Now we don't have to worry about specifically the details of all of this code. The only thing that we want to call attention to here are these two lines. And again, this was generated as an example, but what you can see is that we might, as an example, want to label airplanes in images, and we might want to color those outlines or those labels red. And we also might want to label cars in our images and label those instances or objects blue. Obviously, we don't have airplanes and cars in our Galapagos imagery. We have different types of lava. So let's go ahead and put some different types of lava in here. So we have that's the type of lava that we want to identify. We also have some Pahoehoe lava. And we can add some other different types of lava. So we're going to go ahead and copy and add some more lavas or more labels that we want to identify. So after Pahoehoe, maybe we also want to identify scoria, which is scoria, like that. And let's put one more in here. Let's call it old lava, like this. I'll go ahead and delete this last line. Now, one thing I want to point out is that if you are going to work on a labeling project with multiple people, multiple users, you really want to make sure that you set up this configuration file correctly to begin with. It'll make your life much easier if you get all of these designations, all of these different types of lavas, in this case, correct across everyone who is using or who will be labeling images. There are ways to go back and modify the configuration file, but it can get messy really quickly. So spend some time with your team to make sure that all of these labels are the exact same with capitalization, etc. before moving on. Oh, and before I move on, I'm going to go ahead and change these colors. So here we have is going to be colored red, Pahoehoe blue, scoria, we're going to color this black, and old lava, we're going to color orange. And there's a whole bunch of different colors you can choose from. I'm not sure of all of them, but certainly blue, black, orange, red, purple, green, yellow. The common ones are available for you. Okay, so before we get any further, let's click Save. And we have our configuration saved. Now let's go back and look at our file browser. Here we're in foo labels. And now notice that in addition to this data directory, we also have this directory called labeling. And Label Studio created this directory and titled this directory labeling because we said start a project called labeling. And if we go into that directory, we can see Label Studio already populated it with several files and a subdirectory. Now let's look at the configuration file, and you can see that this configuration file is the exact same thing that we just set up in this web page. It has all of our different types of lavas with all of our different types of colors that we're going to associate with those lavas. And this, again, just to reemphasize, this is what we want to make sure is common across all of our teammates or our users in a labeling project. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. And notice that this subdirectory called completions, if we go into it, is currently empty. But we're going to go ahead and start labeling some data pretty soon, and we'll see that as we label it, this data will start to populate. So now let's go back to our web page, and we're going to want to import some data, some images to actually label. So we're going to go to our Import tab. Label Studio makes this really easy. All you do is click on this diagram here to drag and drop your files or select. We're in foo labels again. If we go to our data directory, here are our images that we want to label. We'll select all of them. And it says that we have created 12 tasks. And they've chosen the word tasks, Label Studio has, because, again, they're a general tool. These could be audio files or any other kinds of data. So it's saying that there are these 12 tasks created, which correspond to the 12 images that we've uploaded. We'll go ahead and close this dialog. And let's look at these tasks in detail a little bit. So we're going to go to the Tasks tab, and we see here are our 12 tasks. These are the images that we're going to want to label. And the way we start labeling, we can either click this button here, Start Labeling, and that will take us through tasks one by one sequentially, or we can just click on one of them and see how this one looks in particular. So we're going to click on 0, and we're going to get a new page that displays our image, and it also displays our 4 lava types. And now we're pretty much set to start labeling. So let's go ahead and start labeling some lava in these images. So here, I already see some Pahoehoe. I'm going to start labeling this as Pahoehoe here, maybe kind of roughly. All I'm doing is clicking, and to designate this as a polygon, you have to click on where you started. And now we have this nice polygon labeled blue, as we said in the configuration file. Now there's also this larger region here that looks to be like old lava, so I'm going to go ahead and click old lava and start labeling this roughly. And see, oh, maybe I'm making a few mistakes here and there. We'll go back and fix those in a second. But I'm just going to label this really quickly and come back again to where we started, and we have this now polygon that's labeled old lava. Now Label Studio makes this really intuitive to go back and modify your polygons. You can simply click on a polygon to review all of the points that you've added, and it's really intuitive just to go over and click and drag a point over if you think you've made a mistake. And you can also come in here and add more detail if you feel like you maybe want to refine your polygon a little bit. So if you click anywhere on this line between 2 points, you can add more points, and you can drag and adjust. Oops, I accidentally added a new polygon. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So you can click in between 2 points and really refine the polygon to best reflect your observations in these images, and to really hone in on the detail in this as you see fit. So Label Studio is really good at building these kind of intuitions into their programming. Now, you would go normally and label all of these different types of lava in here and before moving forward, but for simplicity and time's sake, let's say we've labeled everything that we want to label. Now, it's important that we click this Submit button, and it has a little bit of processing. And if we once we click Submit, we get back to the same page, but if we go to our file browser and go to our completions directory, we now see that there's a file in here called 0, and this 0 corresponds to the 0th task, or the 0th image. And this extension of JSON is a common extension in Python programming. Again, you don't have to be familiar with it, but it's really handy because if you open it in any kind of text editor, it's not written in binary, it's plain text, so you can actually start to get an intuition as to what this completion or this label file looks like. And this information is again corresponding directly to our polygons that we labeled, where these points here are the points that we've clicked on in this image, and those points correspond to a label designation of Pahoehoe. Similarly, we have some points down here, and these points correspond to our label designation of, way down here, old lava. So it's really easy to get an idea of what these types of data look like directly, which can help in sharing these types of data eventually, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. We'll close out of this and come back to the web browser. Now, what I want to show is how we can start, we can stop a project. You're not going to label all of your images all at once. It's going to be maybe an iterative process. So let's pretend, we're going to shut down our computer, for instance. We'll close this file or this web browser, go back to our terminal, and to get out of the Label Studio program, to terminate it running, you just hit Control-C, and that will stop Label Studio. But say, now we want to restart this project, pick up where we left off. All we do now is we call the Label Studio program, Label Studio. We say start, and the project name, and we named it labeling. And now we don't need to initialize it. We can just go ahead and click enter. And again, we'll have some readout to the terminal, and it will open up a web page running on a local host with our 8080 port. We can come back to our tasks, and we can see that indeed this first task, or this first image, maintained our labels that we went ahead and identified earlier. Now, I said previously that the setup, it's important to get the setup correct first time around, and it makes things easier if you can get it correct the first time around, but you can go in and actually modify it at this point. So I'm just going to quickly show you how to do that. Let's say we want to add one more type of lava in here. So we're going to copy and paste this last label of old lava, but let's say we also have another type of lava, or another thing that we want to label, which is sulfur, like that. And let's color sulfur as white. Now we'll come in here and save, and the label configuration is saved now. We can go into our file directory, look at our configuration.xml, and we see sulfur is now in our configuration file, so that's good. And if we come back to our web page, go to our tasks, and go to our 0th task, which we've already labeled, we can see that nothing has changed, except now we have a, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th labeling class called sulfur. So we could label sulfur now. Now, this is a real speedy introduction as to how to label data, and now I kind of want to shift gears and talk about how we can share some of these outputs of Label Studio with different users working on the same labeling project. So, let me go ahead and close this web browser, and let me go ahead and stop Label Studio by hitting Control-C. It's now stopped. And let me come back to my file browser and come back to this test label project, and recall that we've had two directories here, and we've been working in this directory, foo labels. Foo again corresponds to one particular user on this project. But let's say there's another person on this project called bar, and they're working in concert, and I've already set this up a little bit. In fact, let's go ahead and open up two windows here so we can see these side by side. And here we're going to open up foo labels, and here we have bar labels on the left-hand side. And already these directories are looking very similar. They both have a project called labeling, so we're going to open that up in both. And we see each one of these has a similar file structure, each of which contain a file called config.xml. Now, to share a labeling project across different users, there's a few things that you really want to keep consistent. You want to make sure that these configuration files match across all of your users. That's going to be really important. So let's open up bar's configuration file here, and let's open up foo's configuration file here. And they opened in the same tab, and I'll drag it apart here. Alright, so here this is the most important parts right here. And we can see that these do look to be matching. We have Pahoy Hoy, Scoria, Old Lava, Sulfur. All of the capitalizations match. And the colors match too, so that's good. So these configuration files match. That's going to be really important for sharing across a project. And the other thing that is pretty intuitive that should match, but just to make things cover all of our bases, we want to make sure the data match. So we want to make sure the data have the same naming, the same files are within each directory, so we're both looking at the same images. Obviously, for any labeling project, you're going to want to have the same data across all of your users, but it's important to point out that these, the file names and everything about these data should be the exact same. Now, let's go back to our bar user, into their labeling project, and let's look at their completions. Notice that we have two completions here. We have the 0th completion, and we have a 1 completion. Conversely, if we look at Foo's labeling project and their completions, we've only, just a second ago, we only labeled 1 image. But because our configuration files match, and because we're looking at the same data, I can simply copy this file, and in real life we would be emailing these files or perhaps sharing them over Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that. But for this example, I'm simply going to copy this from Bar's directory and paste it into Foo's directory. Paste. And now we have the same shared completion or labeling of this particular image across both users. So I'll go ahead and close Bar's directory and focus on Foo again. Let's come back to our terminal. We're going to start Label Studio again. We'll say, Label Studio, start. The project name is labeling. We'll click Enter. It'll open up our default web browser on our 8080 port. Everything looks the same. We've been here before. Now let's go to our tasks. And we see now we've had 2 completions. We've had this 0 completion, which we did just a few minutes ago. And then we have this 1 completion, or this task idea of 1, that we copied over from, or were emailed from user Bar. So let's go ahead and look at this completion and see how it works. It'll open up a new page, and we see that we have a different image with a bunch of labels on it. So this is presumably what Bar did. So she went in and labeled all of these data, and now we can look at it to either get an idea of how accurate it is and maybe adapt her methodology or her attention to detail, or we could go in and correct it, for example. So let's say we look at this this polygon here in black, which is labeled scoria, because scoria has a color of black based on our configuration file. But let's say that we're experts, Foo, we are Foo here in this case, and we know that this actually isn't scoria. Maybe this is actually Pahoehoe. So we can click on it and highlight it and come down here and actually just relabel it as Pahoehoe. Or for instance, maybe we want to refine the detail of this label designation of AA. So we could come in here and actually modify these, the detail or anything else about these labels. And from here we could, again, share this back with our colleagues or keep it ourselves for training or whatever you want to do in terms of collaboration. We now have access to look at how someone else labeled their data and compare it to how we might want to label it and go back and forth in that sense. Make sure though that whenever you mess with any of these tasks, that when you're done, you come down here and click Update. And when you click Update, all you're doing is, if you come down to our web browser here, you're updating these files in your completions directory. And notice if we go to our modification date, we Foo just modified this at 5:50:41, which was just a minute ago. So this was just written as soon as we hit update on this HTML page. So that's pretty much it. This is basically what we've done is quickly gone over how to install Label Studio, the real basics of how to label polygons with Label Studio, and most importantly, how we can make sure that configuration files and data files are similar, assuming those are similar across users, how we can share completions from one user to the next in order to check or in other ways just collaborate with multiple people on a single project. So thanks for watching and happy labeling.